And there you go. So now we've officially started. Thank you so much for taking time out on a Thursday evening to be here with us today. I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's event, which is hosted by Biniyog Briddhi in partnership with Bangladesh Women Investors Network and Bangladesh Angels Network. To give you a little bit of background on Biniyog Briddhi is a multi-year program that is set up as a public-private partnership development supported by the Embassy of Switzerland in Bangladesh and implemented by Roots of Impact and LightCastle Partners. On the topic of gender inclusion via impact investing, we've actually been hosting a series of events and webinars that have been conducted over the past year. And today marks the third of such an event in the series. Last Monday, we also hosted a webinar where we really focused on impact management and measurement and simultaneously women as customers. Today's event has actually been organized in a hybrid format. So the opening remarks and the keynote presentation will actually be provided via Zoom. And then we will have an in-person panel discussion followed by a networking session. The reason for this hybrid setup is to really ensure that we're able to leverage the best practices from international experts, but also leveraging the know-how and knowledge of our local experts. Without further ado, we will now step into the opening remarks. The opening remarks will be provided by Corinne Enchant-Pinani, who's the Deputy Head of Cooperation at the Embassy of Switzerland in Bangladesh. If you can maybe bring up the Zoom.
All right, so shall I start? Shall I wait?
Corinne, we're good to go, so you can start off.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Faria. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, colleagues. Good evening, friends. I'm awfully sorry not to be able to be with you tonight. As you might probably hear, for those of you who know me already, I haven't my normal voice. I was tested with COVID on Tuesday, and as you can imagine, I cannot get out of the house, and I wouldn't, because it wouldn't be responsible. So that's why I'm addressing to you, from a Zoom link, and in that way, I'm really happy that it was anyway foreseen. So it's an absolute honor and pleasure for me to be able to give you a couple of opening remarks. Most of all, I should start by saying that Switzerland, celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations between Bangladesh and my country this year in 2022, we always put gender at the center of what we are doing. Of course, with the years, it has evolved, from women in development to gender mainstreaming. But at the heart, despite the labeling, remains the importance to also have women at the table, whatever are the questions at stake, and whatever are the issues that are dealt with. In our country program for the coming years, 2022-25 to be precise, one of the outcome that we have that should be across all our programming is gender and social inclusion. So tonight is a pleasure for me, and also, as we were just reminded, tonight is one of the events that have been organized around the topic of gender inclusion. And some of you, I think, might have been as well as at the launch of the strategy and implementation action plan of the NAB, the National Advisory Board of Bangladesh for Impact Investing. And what are one of the recommendations of the strategy and action plan was indeed to reflect and focus and move forward as well on gender inclusion in impact investing. So here we are in the mid of the journey. So now what has to be said is that when we talk about incorporating gender and gender lens in impact investing or economic or financial inclusion, it usually refers to a spectrum that covers workplace equity, women in leadership, women as investors, women in the supply chain, women-focused products and services, women's access to capital. What we want to make sure, though, is that we are addressing the topic of gender inclusion in a holistic way. And instead of focusing on women entrepreneurship or women's leaders, which is important, but instead of focusing only on these two aspects, we also want to focus on women as customers, impact, and how to measure the impact and how to manage the difference we want to make in the women at customers. And since last December, B-Briddhi has already organized 2 webinars touching of the topic. And the project as well, B-Briddhi, has also recently launched the gender chapter as an extension of the impact measurement and management toolkit. So this is a milestone in the history of B-Briddhi, and congrats to the team for that. So of course, today we are super excited to listen to our keynote speaker, Shuyin, because she's going to bring her experience in Southeast Asia for us. She's going also to share with us international best practices and how it comes to how to serve women-led businesses better through innovative financing instruments. So we are really looking forward to listening to you, Shuyin. And we also have an amazing panel that will help us contextualize in Bangladesh this topic of discussion. And we will have the experience of investors, True Value, of entrepreneurs supporting organization, Bangladesh Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who is also a member of the NAB, and the legal perspective with the Legal Circle. The Legal Circle has been in the journey with us for quite a while in impact investing. So very much looking forward to listening to you, ladies. So now I hope that you will leave this event not only feeling good about participating to something interesting, exciting, inspiring, but also that it will expand your own ideas on how you, with the use of financial tools, you can contribute to a gender inclusion as well. So with that and without further ado, I'm going to stop. I thank you for your kind attention. I'm very thankful to all the colleagues to work to have this event happening. And as I said, very much looking forward to listening to our keynote speaker and to our 3 panelists. Thank you very much. Over to you, Faria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corinne, and I hope you heard the round of applause for you there. We're definitely going to miss you here today, but thank you for joining us in and providing your opening remarks. Without further ado, we'll now move on to our keynote presenter. The keynote presentation today will actually be offered by Shuyin Tang. Shuyin is a partner at Palomar Capital, a leading impact investing firm in Southeast Asia. Simultaneously, she also serves as a co-founder and chief executive officer of the BWIN Fund, which is a boundary-breaking fund for female entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia's emerging markets. She has led investments in education, fintech, employee benefits, and also healthcare companies. And she also serves as a board director at a number of portfolio companies, including Kim An Group, Topica, Superhands, and Canal Circle. She spearheads Padamar's gender lens investing efforts, including managing one of the world's first gender lens investing funds in Southeast Asia, the Investing in Women Fund. Hi, Shuin. Perfect. Okay, I think.
Hello, can you hear me now? I think I was just having a little trouble getting, okay, wonderful. Let me share my screen as well. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right, wonderful. It's always a little challenging when you're not there in person, but let me get started. Good evening, everyone, and hello from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Thank you so much to the hosts for inviting me to speak today. It's a real privilege to have the opportunity to share about a topic that I am very passionate about. Have dedicated a large portion of my career to working in. I'm only sorry that I can't be with you there in person, but hopefully next time at a future event. Maybe just a quick introduction about myself. As mentioned, I'm a partner at Padamar Capital, and we're one of the most active impact investing firms in Southeast Asia. Apart from leading our Vietnam office, I also lead our gender lens investing strategy. And a key part of that was launching one of the first gender lens investing funds in Southeast Asia, our Investing in Women Fund. And as shared by the organizers today, I think we would really love to go beyond, the what, like what is gender lens investing, to really share more on the how. So I thought I would frame my presentation today as a set of mythbusters when it comes to gender lens investing. So these are common myths or misconceptions about GLI that we kind of learned as we implemented a GLI ourselves. And that's been a kind of an interesting journey over the 6 years, and hopefully I'll be able to share very frankly about it and some of the learnings that we faced. And also the pitfalls along the way. And hopefully this will turbocharge your own gender lens investing journey. I do have to spend maybe just a little bit of time on the what before we get into the myth busting section. So we're all on the same page about gender lens investing and what it refers to. I know some of this might have been covered in previous sessions, so I'll keep this concise. So for us, at least the way that we define it is gender lens investing is an approach to investing that takes into consideration gender-based factors across the investment process to better inform investment decisions as well as advance gender equality. And I think you see that there's a both and here. So it's both about informing investment decisions as well as advancing gender equality. Sometimes there is a lot of debate on whether you should focus more on the business case or more on the moral case. At least for us, it's really important to focus on both, right? It's both the smart thing to do as well as the right thing to do. And both components have been really important in why we decided to adopt and embrace a gender lens ourselves. So as shared already by Corinne, there are actually many different lenses you can apply when we think about GLI. So it can be advancing women in investment roles as fund managers, on investment committees, advancing women in leadership roles, so founders, C-suite positions amongst the companies themselves. And then, of course, as the products and services, right, that are improving the lives of women and girls. And then finally, about advancing workplace equity, both internally as well as through the supply chain. And I think, as we'll see and we'll come to in this presentation, different investors might actually emphasize different lenses, depending on what makes sense for their own investment thesis and their firm. And I'll share some examples of that. Maybe just quickly a little bit on, well, what is, how big is this GLI market? What exactly is the state of the market? So if we look at private gender lens investing funds, so that is venture capital, private equity, as well as private debt funds, they're actually tracked in a report called Project Sage, which is produced by Wharton, as well as Suzanne Beagle, who's a very well-known name in the gender lens investing sector. The first report was produced in 2017, where, as you can see, there were 58 funds with $1.1 billion in capital that they were managing. That has grown pretty rapidly up to 206 funds in 2020, managing 5.3 billion raised. So still, this is obviously a drop in the ocean when compared to the total size of the private markets. But as you can see here, this is definitely a strategy that is gaining momentum. I think a couple of other interesting points on this research. So about 2/3 of these funds are still, first-time funds. It's quite natural given this is a relatively new field. But I think it is important to note that the managers or general partners of these funds may not necessarily be first-time fund managers, right? But this could be, they could be extremely experienced, but this is the first time running a fund with this particular focus or with this particular theme. I think the final point that I'd like to highlight here is that Asia, where we are, is an incredibly important region for GLI. So in the very first report back in 2017, 80% of the funds actually focused on North America, so essentially the US. In the most recent report, basically Asia has jumped to being the third most active gender lens investing market. So we are in the right place. Now let me move on to the myths. And I think this actually ties on very, very nicely from Corinne's opening remarks, because I think there is one myth that is, that gender lens investing is simply about counting the number of female entrepreneurs that you've invested in. Or a variation of this could be counting the number of women on a portfolio company's board. I'm certainly not saying that these numbers aren't important. Of course, gathering this data is certainly helpful to know, but it's simply not enough. So I think gender lens investing, I think it's important to remember this shouldn't be a check the box exercise. Actually, just counting the number of women that you've invested in actually provides not so much information about the actual impact for women or how your investment process might actually have some unconscious bias built into it. So sometimes I hear, a comment like, oh, we've invested in 10 women-led companies this year. And that's great, but it's actually not a thesis. I think the deeper and more interesting questions to ask are, how did we actually get to that outcome, right, of investing in 10 women-led companies, for example? Was it intentional? Was there a strategy behind it, or did it just happen? And how would that add value to our investment thesis? And I think so for us at our firm, we actually did have to take that step of identifying, why is this important to us actually? Let's break down our investment process and understand where gender could, actually provide us a window onto new opportunities or potentially identify some pitfalls or risks. Let me give one example. So for example, as we do due diligence, one of the things that we always look for as an investment firm is that the entrepreneurs that we back have a very deep understanding of their customer and their customer segment. And in many cases, as we were doing this, we actually discovered that many of the customers that these entrepreneurs or their businesses were serving were actually female or largely female, often 70, 80, 90%. And for us, as a part of demonstrating that deep customer understanding, we would really look to the entrepreneurs to have an understanding of how women's needs, right, might differ in some cases, or how that might require targeted product and service design to actually meet those needs. And I think for us, that was a sign that this was an entrepreneur that we wanted to back, and something we looked for in the process. Again, maybe this still sounds a little bit theoretical or intangible to you. So let me give another kind of example grounded in an actual investment that we've made. So one of these companies is a company in Vietnam. It's called MindX. It's a provider of STEAM education for the K-12 segment as well as young adults. So this company actually is a women-led business with more than 50% of the board and the management team being female. that was, interesting to know, and a good data point. But we didn't stop at saying, oh yes, we invested in a female entrepreneur. We actually found it even more interesting to understand, how they actually thought, gender played a role in their business. As I'm sure most of you in this room would be aware, and the founders of this business also were, there is a very big gender gap, right, when it comes to STEAM. And the founders and management team of this business actually wanted to contribute to closing that gap through their business itself. And again, this was not just because it was the right thing to do, but they also saw it as a smart thing to do. Girls and young women are underserved market when it comes to STEAM education. So they thought that being a pioneer in this segment and really capturing this market early could be a very attractive business proposition as well. So they looked at their enrollments, and actually, they did notice that for most of their coding classes, it was the vast majority of those enrollments were actually boys and young men. And they brainstormed, well, how can we change that? How can we increase our female enrollments? And they did notice the unfortunate gender norm in Vietnam, as in many places, that coding is more something for boys or men. However, they thought, well, maybe we can identify new pathways into the tech sector or the STEAM sector. And they actually opened up new classes in UI UX, in product management, and digital media and digital arts, which might seem, I guess, more accessible pathways for women and girls. When they did that, female enrollments actually doubled in these courses, which was a great sign, right? And also, I think, as I mentioned before, a great kind of business opportunity for them. Ultimately, of course, we would love to see more women and girls also in coding itself. But I think by opening up this pathway, they enabled many women and girls to take their first step into the STEAM sector and ultimately get a job in this space. Moving on to the next topic, or the next myth that I'd like to bust, is that, but it's actually one that I hear a bit, is that men can't be or shouldn't be gender lens investors. And I can see how this perception could arise, that GLI is simply about supporting women or something only women can get behind. However, again, through our own experience, right, we've found that men are critically important in supporting the growth of GLI. And this was definitely true at our own firm and for many other firms that I know of as well. And I won't deny that sometimes this can be a bit of a sensitive topic, right? And there've been uncomfortable moments, both for the men and the women, as we talked about this. But I think we got to a much better result by having everyone at our firm involved in this conversation, and not just the women. Maybe one example I can share here is from a portfolio company board meeting attended by one of my male business partners. And he was looking at the presentation, and he actually noticed that from a picture of a customer visit that the vast majority of this company's customers are women. And he asked the management team in that board meeting, well, what percentage is this? What can you share about this topic? They looked a bit uncomfortable and actually admitted that they didn't know, but to their credit, they went away, looked into it further, and some of the results of their findings sparked some very interesting discussions about customer segmentation, about customer acquisition strategies, and loyalty. And what they found is that women can often be much more sticky and loyal customers if you build a product or service for them that really meets their needs. I think one point to note here is that this was actually an all-male management team at that time, and an all-male board. Obviously, that's not an ideal situation at all, but it shouldn't necessarily be a barrier to applying a gender lens, right? And I tell this story a lot to encourage, I think, men to also speak up on this topic, because advocacy is absolutely essential. And I think maybe, again, another piece to note, just the second bullet point, is that GLI is really not about promoting a women-only approach. I think, at least in most cases, it's really about building and backing diverse teams. There's a great IFC report on gender diversity in private equity and venture capital. And one of the key findings is that funds with gender balanced senior investment teams, so that is at least 30% men, 30% women, and 40% of any gender, generated 20% higher net IRR compared with funds that have a majority male or female leaders. So, I think, I've said it time and time again, we're really advocating for a diversity rather than a women only type of approach. The third myth that I would like to bust, and the final myth, is that GLI is a one-size-fits-all approach. One of the concerns that I hear about GLI is that this won't suit us, right? We don't have a mandate to invest only in women. We can't limit our investment pipeline like that. Or, for example, another kind of concern that I would hear is that this is too resource intensive. We don't have the time to focus on something that isn't our core mandate. Our LPs will become worried. They'll think we've become distracted, right, with other, with these, tangential type of strategies. And I hear you as a GP myself. I can understand these can be legitimate concerns. However, thankfully, that's not actually what gender lens investing is about. As we've heard many times already, even in this short amount of time, there are many different gender lenses, right? And we don't have to adopt all of them at once. And maybe some of them, you might not focus on at all. And I think that is okay. But it is about identifying which lenses or lens really makes sense for your investment thesis and your firm. So, similarly, I mean, gender doesn't have to be the very core thesis, right, or central thesis of your fund. It could be one consideration, right, an important consideration, hopefully. And again, that's okay. Even at our fund, I mean, or our own firm, right? So we have 4 different funds, and we apply different approaches across these 4 different funds. So, for example, we have 2 funds where gender really is at the forefront. We've been investing there in women-owned and women-led businesses exclusively. We're conducting pretty in-depth gender analysis as part of our due diligence. We've built the investment process, so there are diverse investment decision makers at every level. But on the other hand, we also have several other funds where it's just a lens, right? It isn't the core principle of the fund. The core principle of those funds, in contrast, is about investing in early stage technology companies to transform the lives of Southeast Asia's emerging middle class. So I think you can see there, it is possible to have different theses which embrace gender in different ways. And you can do that kind of very intentionally, I would say, and authentically as well. I think before I wrap up today, I was also asked to share a little bit more about one of our latest funds, the Beacon Fund. And hopefully here, I'd like to highlight a few things which will be picked up in the coming panel on innovative financing instruments. So Panama ourselves, we actually started out as a series of VC funds. And over time, though, we realized that this exclusive focus on VC actually led to us missing a lot of opportunities, particularly amongst this missing middle segment. And what do I mean by this missing middle? So there's these companies, which I'm sure we've all seen in our own work, which may not necessarily fit that growth profile of venture capital. So not these exponential growth companies, which can go 10x, 100x, right? But at the same time, have some interesting characteristics, right? They're more about sustainable growth and actually contributing a lot of impact for their customers and their communities. These companies typically are also, too small for private equity, find it difficult to access bank financing for a number of different reasons, often around collateral. But at the same time, these are not micro businesses, right? These are already, small, medium-sized businesses who have that hunger and potential to grow. We saw that, the financing options in our market, at least, was very lacking for this missing middle. And as a result, we launched this fund, which focuses on debt and mezzanine products to better meet their needs. So we do a number of different, unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about all the different products that we use, but we use a mix of instruments, right? Ranging from straight loans to venture debt to revenue sharing mechanisms to more appropriately serve the needs of this segment. We also have implemented impact-linked pricing, whereby companies who meet certain impact targets, and particularly gender targets, can actually unlock more affordable pricing. And I think the third innovation here is that we actually offer smaller tickets there than some of our other funds at Panama, down to $200,000 because we see often that kind of minimum ticket size can be a barrier to different companies, particularly women-led companies, accessing financing. And then finally, we've also adopted an open-ended fund structure, again, which we thought was a better fit for the needs of the segment and more in line with our long-term goal of improving access to finance for women. Maybe let me just wrap up now with some few final reflections and tips, right? Hopefully to inspire you as you start on, your journey or kind of take it further, right? I think the first thing that I would say is if you hadn't really engaged with GLI or gender lens investing yet, just get started, right? And don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think when I first entered the space, I did find it was quite a lot to take in. Sometimes it seemed a little bit theoretical, but there are many simple ways in which we can all start, right? So for example, just by gathering baseline data on our portfolio companies, ask the questions, right? Show people, show your companies that you're interested, and that can often inspire and inform your next steps. I think the second point, as I've said, convince your stakeholders, right, that gender lens adds value in a very practical way. This isn't just some check the box exercise, but it really can add value to your investment process, right, and also enhance the impact of your fund. So I think, the way that we did it is by sharing tangible examples of how GLI actually helped us capture some new opportunity or avoid certain risks. And that's kind of been our change management approach. The third point here is, ideally we can get to a place where gender is a really organic part of the process, right? Where it's something natural that comes up during due diligence, during our investment discussions. However, I think along the way, sometimes we've found that certain, checkpoints or reminders are required, right? So for example, making sure it's included in every investment memo, right? There's a section around gender analysis in a particular company. And then my final kind of point or learning, I would say, from our own experience is, make sure that gender lens investing doesn't stop at the investment decision or the portfolio construction decision. It's really important in portfolio management too. And I would actually say for us, that's maybe where we've been able to have some of our, the greatest and deepest kind of both impact as well as, business learning and business opportunity. Through applying it actively at the portfolio management stage. I really look forward to kind of the coming panel discussion on innovative financial instruments. I also have a lot to learn on the landscape in Bangladesh, and would like to thank everyone once again for their attention, and wish you a great discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuin, for taking the time to join us here today and for all of those insightful remarks that you introduced the room to today. I think with that, we're now ready to move into our panel discussion, which gives me the privilege to actually introduce our panelists that will be joining us here for the discussion. We have three incredible and renowned women from our ecosystem here with us. So it is my pleasure to introduce Reedma Khan, who's a director at Bangladesh Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It is the first chamber of commerce in the country exclusively working towards women's economic and social empowerment, and is also the largest association for female entrepreneurs. Apart from that, BWCCI has actually ensured and facilitated business development, capacity and skill development for over 50,000 women. Thank you so much, Appa, for joining us here today. Second, I would like to welcome Sharawat Islam, Managing Director at the leading impact investing firm in Bangladesh, True Value Enterprises Limited, which apart from initiating impact investments in the country, also supports in ecosystem building. She previously also served as the Chief Executive Officer at one of the leading multinational investment banks in the country, NDB Capital. She also holds a position at Bangladesh Women Investors Network, which supports female entrepreneurship all over the country. Thank you, Appa, for joining us. Extremely grateful for her contributions to the ecosystem. Last but not the least, we have Anita Ghazi Rehman. She is the advocate of the High Court Division of Bangladesh Supreme Court. She's also a founder at one of the top legal organizations in our country, the Legal Circle. Apart from that, she's actually considered one of the top 50 lawyers by Asia Business Law Journal. And most importantly, she has supported hundreds of early stage enterprises in our country to set up their businesses. Thank you so much, Anita, for being with us here today. Last but not the least, we've got our moderator, Maxine Cheng. She's serving as the lead of Impact Intelligence and Education at Roots of Impact, and she also plays the role of program manager for the B-Briddhi program.
Yes, thank you, Fariha. Thank you all for being here today. So as Fariha introduced, we have a really amazing panel today. So we will first start with Reedma, who will share a little bit more on the overall context of women as entrepreneurs in Bangladesh. And then we will move on to Sharawat from True Value, who also will be able to tell us a little bit about how to support the building of the pipeline, but also in terms of the gender lens investing kind of initiatives in Bangladesh. And finally, we will move on to the more technical bit that Anita would take care of about how can we make it happen from the legal perspective. So without further ado, let's begin. Ritma, thank you for being here today. So I know that for Bangladesh Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry, so BWCCI, there are many different areas of work that you've been doing. Maybe you could walk us through like the different areas of work that you cover, and then we can dive deep in the later part.
Thank you, Maxim, for that wonderful introduction. I would like to thank everyone for the opportunity of allowing me to speak here today. So Bangladesh Women Chambers of Commerce and Industry, as Faria has already mentioned, is the first women-centric chamber of commerce and industry in Bangladesh. We started our journey in 2001. And right now, we are the only women-centric chamber of commerce which operates nationwide. Since I am an entrepreneur, but I'm also a teacher, I am a faculty at North South University, I'm going to use an imagery to tell you what I think of Bangladesh Women Chambers of Commerce and Industry. So the way I see it, it's a bridge between dreams and ambitions. I think we turn women's dreams into ambitions, or we try to at least. BWCCI operates on women's economic empowerment. And the way we do that is that we actually operate on 3 levels. The first level is research. So we try and find out the research on what is the socio-economic context in which a woman entrepreneur is operating today in Bangladesh. And when I say woman entrepreneur, I don't mean myself or the other elite class that we see in panels, we see in TVs. I mean people who have had a very humble beginning, who are the grassroots level entrepreneurs. Bangladesh Women Chamber operates nationwide. We have 7,000 members all over the country, and they're from all walks of life. We are not all from Dhaka. We are not all educated. We are not all privileged. So these are the faces that you don't see. These are the invisible faces, as I like to call them. So we try to understand what is the socioeconomic context they're coming from, what are the challenges and the concerns and their needs. And that is one part of our job. The second part of our job is to provide them with support. So we provide a skill and capacity training exercises for women entrepreneurs. We have operated and we have thankfully partnered and affiliated with many international NGOs. We have affiliated with many international sponsors and donors who have been very kindly investing in our firm to provide women's economic empowerment. A few that I would actually speak about is, let's say, for example, with the European Commission, European Union Commission actually operated with us, and we actually had a very sustainable project working with women entrepreneurs in rural areas and teaching them how to make sustainable products from waste products like banana leaves and pineapple pulp and make them into economically viable products like clothing or bags. We have worked with Transparency International. We've worked for a corporation. We're working with SIPE. We're working on gender-based violence at workplaces. We are working with Meta for digital entrepreneurship. We're working with the government of Bangladesh on a skills and employment investment program, which basically works from taking an aspiring entrepreneur and taking them in an entire journey until they're becoming an independent entrepreneur or working woman. So there is a variety of projects, and I would not continue going on to it, but I just simply touched upon on that. And the final thing that we do, and which I think is the most important, is advocacy. So we basically work on finding those implementation gaps and those loopholes and those policy gaps that we face as women. And then we try and work on advocacy and lobbying the government to address those. And a few successes that we have achieved is For example, working on collateral-free loans from women entrepreneurs, to reducing the interest rate, to find an allocation for women development in the national budget. So there has been quite a few successes, quite a few failures, and quite a few attempts by us in a very humble attempt to create a more conducive business environment for women entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritma. I think that's also quite helpful to know the different range of activities that you have been dedicating time and effort to. Maybe we can speak a little bit more based on the research that you have mentioned, right? What are some of the challenges or barriers that are very specific to women entrepreneurs in Bangladesh?
Bangladesh Women Chambers of Commerce and Industry was honored to present the first women business national agenda to the government a few years ago. We worked with 18 other organizations. It was a nationwide research program, and it was basically focused on the question you just asked me. So that was basically talking about what are the barriers that women entrepreneurs face? Why don't we see women more in the entrepreneurship arena, in spite of the fact that the government keeps on making policies and implementation gaps? So being somebody who has been in this arena for the last 10 years. Okay. Okay. So being someone who has been in this arena for the last 10 years, I had certain expectation, which I shouldn't have as a researcher, but I did. And because we go on every panel and we speak about access to finance. So I thought that is going to be the biggest challenge that a woman entrepreneur faces. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how exactly to frame it, the biggest challenge that we found was a patriarchal attitude, the inability of men to accept women on the public domain. And that was something whether it spoke about in relation to their superiors, to their employers, and also to their family, who refused to allow them to work or even enter entrepreneurship. So I think one of the biggest challenges is patriarchal mindset that women belong to the home, especially after marriage and especially after they have had children. The second we found is access to finance, which is the universal problem that women entrepreneurs face. With relation to access to finance, I think at the risk of repeating myself, there are many issues. One is, in spite of the fact that the government and the Bangladesh Bank continually making policies to ease this process for the women entrepreneurs, we do not see any such thing happening. And the reason is because while there are great policies, there are many implementation gaps. And I think the supply side factors which really need to be taken into account is the attitude of the banking staff. We have gender development desks, according to a Bangladesh Bank circular, but the staff who is sitting on these gender desks are not very friendly towards women entrepreneurs. So if I go to a bank, I'm aware of the documentation requirement, I'm aware of what to do. But if a grassroots rural woman who is not very educated goes there, they use big words, and I'm actually paraphrasing a member of ours. They use big words which confuse her, and she never goes back to the bank. So we need more awareness from the bank. We need to provide them with more incentives to accept women entrepreneurs and provide them with loans. There's also this negative attitude that a woman would not repay the loan, where statistically speaking, they're more likely to. So we need to create more awareness among the banking staff. On the demand side, I think we need to make women more aware of what are the documentation, create more capable women so that they're able to go to the bank fully prepared on what are the requirements and formalities that are expected from her. Other than that, I think the fact of work-life balance that a woman tends to face, because the majority of the household chores and childbearing responsibilities are still women's. So there is that. We have great policies. We have some good policies, but we really need to ensure that the implementation works. For example, getting a trade license, that also requires not one stop, but rather 8 stops for a woman to do. There is harassment at workplace. There is harassment at public places. So there needs to be greater protection for women at the public domain as well. And I think one of the key ways that we can actually overcome this is through digital entrepreneurship. And the problem with digital entrepreneurship is that it is still in the very early stages. So a lot of our entrepreneurs who have actually gone into F-commerce, have gone into e-commerce, are facing problems because they cannot get a trade license, because the trade license requires a physical shop and they do not have it because they're operating from home. I think our ministry is already working on a reform as we speak. But that is one issue. Getting a trade license, getting the trade license renewed. Another issue is often with relation to having bank accounts not being linked to their Bcash accounts. So what happens is that I am doing a great digital business, but when I go to the bank to get a loan, I am a completely new customer. So there needs to be a lot of work done on the ground level to enhance entrepreneurship, both digital and otherwise.
Thank you so much. I think that's super interesting because that shed light on some of the parts that maybe Sharabat could also pick up on from your experience supporting women entrepreneurs, which we will dive into. But also it's been very interesting because I've been learning also a lot about the digital payment and also credit record creation of a lot of the startups that have been working here. So maybe there are some gaps that some of the partners here that could look into filling. But then speaking of which, then maybe I think it's a perfect time also to switch to talk to Sharabat, because I know that Truevalue has been operating in Bangladesh both as an investor, but also a capacity building organization, so to speak. And I know that in terms of gender lens investing, there has been some new thought and strategic direction that you would like to share with us. So over to you. We're curious to hear about what Truevalue is planning to do when it comes to gender lens investing.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say Truevalue has not yet started gender lens investing formally, but we are a social impact investor, right? So we have always considered women or job creation for women or products and services for women kind of as a social impact criteria when we invested before. So consciously we were not doing GLI, but these were always in the back of our minds. Right now we are thinking of bringing GLI formally into our investment thesis. Our head office is working on it. And in October, we are supposed to formalize our investment thesis, our impact framework.
We'll be including GLI factors. And apart from investments, we also do a lot of capacity building work, which we consider as our backward linkage for investments. We think this is also very important to us as investors because we do not often get investment ready enterprises or capable enterprises capable to absorb equity, growth equity. So that is why we put a lot of effort on capacity building as well. And for capacity building activities, we have worked with a number of female enterprise, women focused. I won't say women led, but I'd say women focused enterprises. And if I give you an example of one of our investments, so that is the company is called Classical Handmade Products. They make biodegradable home decor items and also export to Europe. So majority of their employees are women. So we made these investments when we were not even consciously looking at GLI or not thinking of ourselves as a gender lens investor. So, but we always thought that this is important. Gender is an important criteria in any form. It can be, as my predecessor said, that gender lens can be in any form, can be women in board, maybe in the form of workplace equity, in the form of products or services, or in the form of ownership by women. So yes, we have done this before and we'll continue to do it.
Maybe you can also share a little bit based on your experience, because even though it was not a conscious GLI investment, but like through your experience investing, but also hand holding, so to speak, to grow the pipeline
Exactly.
of the investment ready enterprises, what are the specific needs of women entrepreneurs in Bangladesh?
In Bangladesh, what we have seen from our experience is women entrepreneurs or women-focused enterprises also need hand-holding. They also need that business support services, just like any other enterprises. It's not different. And the main challenges faced by women entrepreneurs is, of course, as Ridhima Appa said, access to finance. It's very difficult, getting loan, or sometimes they are not even aware that there are women-focused loans. There are loans at favorable rates for women entrepreneurs. They are often hesitant to go to the banks. Sometimes, I mean, I'm not talking about Dhaka-based startup entrepreneurs. I'm talking about, rural entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs outside Dhaka. So they're often hesitant to go to the banks. And also one other thing that I have noticed is that banks mostly offer working capital loans to women entrepreneurs. But they also need patient capital or growth capital sometimes for growing. So that need is not being catered to. And the women entrepreneurship loans in banks are only focused on women-led enterprises. What if there is an enterprise creating a lot of impact, they are making a product for the benefit of women, or the majority of the workforce is women, they are not going to get that women entrepreneurship loan from the bank. So these issues need to be addressed. The other challenge faced by women entrepreneurs is access to market and networks. So as Ridhima Appa said, that women are sometimes, supposed to be staying home or not having that access. So as investors and capacity building partners, so it is our job to, help women have access to that networks and markets. Sometimes access to legal support, Anita Appa can tell later, is also a challenge for women entrepreneurs. They may not understand the nitty-gritties of, equity investment or financial instruments. So they need help in terms of legal and regulatory support.
I think when you talk about the legal aspect, it was also very interesting in our previous conversation that you mentioned ownership is also often quite tricky, right?
Yes.
When it comes to women-led
Exactly.
businesses. Can you maybe speak a little bit to it?
Yes, in a sense, ownership can be tricky. So sometimes it's from our experience that we try to find women-led businesses or women-owned businesses, but later we found that that enterprise or that SME is actually owned by the husband. The wife's name is just on paper, say as 50% ownership. Why? Because the husband blatantly said that, okay, it helps us get some women entrepreneurship loans easily. It helps us approach the banks easily. But his wife is actually nowhere involved in the operations, doesn't even come in front of us. So this is a very common phenomenon. So yes.
I think it was also interesting because you mentioned an example in one of our conversations that sometimes women own the business, but they actually don't even own the laptop, right?
Yes, yes. The laptops and smartphones are owned by the husband. So they don't even own the laptops. The business and everything, all the assets in the business, like the lands or any other assets are owned by the husband. So it's most often on paper that they, sometimes they are even given titles like chairman, director, but that's just on paper, that's done because so that the husband can approach the bank and, get that women entrepreneurship loan at a favorable rate.
So maybe on that note, I would just supplement another point being that, when investors here trying to practice gender lens investing, maybe it's worthwhile to look beyond just the paper, who is the owner, but really look deep, who is really making the decision in this business. Ritma, you would like to add some point to that, right?
Yeah, so one of the key requirements we have as a member is that it needs to be a woman-owned business in order for you to become a member of BWCCI. And I think it's very interesting because as Sarwatapa has been actually saying it in a very beautiful way, is that we have cases where they are mentioned as the managing director and they have no idea what the business is. So we actually have an interview before we make them into members. And they're sitting there and they're like, yes, I know my husband does this and husband does that. So are you exporting? I think so. And I'm like, what do you mean you think so? So it is really interesting that it is just this. And I think this is also a case because we were speaking about property. And I think even in cases of inheritance law, women do not really have the name on the property deed. And I think the same goes for businesses as well, that in a business property as well, the woman's name is not in the property deed. So when we are looking into GLI, for example, I think it is really important not to just know who is supposedly the managing director, but also who's the de facto person managing the business.
Thank you.
So we should be aware of gender washing in other investors.
Yep. And speaking of which, I think maybe we can also switch the perspective, like for True Value as an investor, right? You also engage in activities building the pipeline. So in that terms, how can you or how have you been trying to build the pipeline of potential investees in a way that you can ensure that women-led businesses are also well represented? So what have you tried?
Okay, pipeline building is the greatest challenge that we have faced so far. Like funding is not the challenge. Investors are there in the Netherlands. They are interested to, invest in GLI focused enterprises. But the challenge is building the pipeline. So what we have realized is we cannot work alone. True Value as an impact investor or an investor interested in GLI cannot work alone to build a pipeline. So we have decided, and we are actively doing that as well, to work with partners like B-Briddhi, LightCastle, BWIN, Bangladesh Women Investors Network, Bangladesh Angels Network, other investors in the market. So maybe development organizations to build up our pipeline so that we can be engaged in capacity building activities, we can be engaged in co-investments, and that is how I think we can find the most enterprises that need the funding most.
Indeed, True Value has been quite a star performer in our B-Briddhi vouchers, even trainer program, and help your enterprises in the voucher scheme. But I think there are also quite some new ways that you have experimented. For example, tapping into digital network like Facebook, yes. Right? Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, we did actually we do this sort of capacity building activities for women. One activity we did, it was called e-clinic. So we worked with a number of female entrepreneurs who were e-commerce based entrepreneurs, Facebook based entrepreneurs. So it was like kind of a doctor's consultation. So that's why it was named e-clinic. So female entrepreneurs would, talk to us about their problems, the challenges they were facing, and then we would support them, give them suggestions. So it was a very, it was not some capacity building activity in a very big extent, but I think at least to some extent we were able to help the entrepreneurs. It was just the beginning. And with B-Briddhi also, we worked with Romani. So it was a female focused and female owned enterprise, impact enterprise. And there also we provided impact management support to this enterprise.
Thank you. I think we have heard a lot about like first-hand examples about what is happening in the forefront, but apparently a lot has to happen also in the back end when it comes to finalizing the investment deals in terms of how we write the contract, right? So Anita, we've been working very closely in the past 2 years, closing several of our SING transaction and also IRMF transactions together. And I know that in Bangladesh, very often when we talk about investing, we use debt or equity very often. But do you also have some other experiences using other types of investing or financing instruments that you have facilitated in the past few years that you could share?
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. So just before I go into that, I just wanted to, from what I've heard from Ridmapa and Sarvatapa, I just wanted to add, the access to fund problem is not just with SMEs. Just sharing a personal anecdote. So last year, I wanted to apply for a loan because obviously women loans come at a better interest rate than your general regular loans, right? And I applied and they said, no, sorry, we can't give you a loan at the 4% or the 5%. I was like, why? I'm a woman, I have a business. What am I missing? And they said, no, but you're not making anything. Can you try making something at home and coming back? So, so there's a whole lot of gap there. So even when you're a woman, even when you have a business, you have another layer, something that Ridmapa was sort of saying that, when you go to the people who are sitting at the desk and they themselves don't know where they're mandated, it becomes really bit difficult. And I said, where does it say I have to manufacture something? I have to make some home product, a jute product or something? And they couldn't answer. So just a personal anecdote on that. Something Sarvatapa said, I just wanted to mention as well, the gender washing thing. One of the things I think, and if you like, I do a little bit of activism wherever I go to do a bit of public speaking. I think awareness needs to be built on the gender washing thing, because when women sign on to, say, company and corporation documents or hold shares in their husband's business just to get access to these women, focused funding, what they do not understand is that when there is a default in a contract, or when there is a default or breach in repayment, and there is a litigation, they still have to go to court. If there is an order against them in money and the money cannot be paid, these women also have to go to, I'm so sorry to say, at the very extreme cases, we have seen women just for holding shares having to go and serve a sentence because they didn't know what they're signing on to. And the person who's running the business has failed to repay. So that, that needs to be explained, and that needs to be understood by the women who are actually signing on for these things. Sorry, that was just a side note. In terms of, I think your question is around what sort of innovative funding have we seen? So talking of funding and innovation, I think I should start with the Biniyog Briddhi program and the Roots of Impact. Not because it's, this is something we've been doing for a while, but it's because, the Roots of Impact or the Biniyog Briddhi programs, particularly the SING that Maxime has mentioned, and the IRMF, which is the Investment Readiness Matching Fund, and the Social Impact incentive agreements that we came up with. This actually took us 2 years to draft up. And then it's been running for 2 years, and every year we come back and, sort of update the contract according to the lessons that you've learned on the ground. But the beauty of it is how simple it is, right? Because what you guys are basically doing is you go through a list of companies that have applied for these funding. You do your due diligence, you give them certain milestones, and then you say, look, you've met these milestones, but one of the milestones also is you have to go and, get this much funding and we'll match it for you, right? So it's not your straight out grant. You're making them, there's some impact milestones they have to make, and then they have to go out and raise funding, and then you match it. So this has been something very exciting for us. And also because your experience with these two instruments have been really good. Another structuring that we really enjoyed doing for the legal circle was with one of what we hope is going to be the unicorns in Bangladesh very soon, was when they do business to B2B lending. And they needed to bring it within a legal structure. And then we brainstormed with them, and we came to a structure where they would tie in with a bank or a financial institution. And then they had the legal sanction to give the loans as well. That became a benchmark, and that was followed across the board by quite a few companies as well. Other than that, there's there's quite a lot going on in Bangladesh. We have recently been talking about revenue sharing contracts with companies, right? Not just equity, not giving them debt, but what about revenue sharing? Can this be done? There are certain complications. It's not as easy as the SINC or the IRMF, but there are certain considerations around tax or around legal that needs to be figured out in those sort of considerations. We are also looking at, there's a lot of interest in the last year around BNPL, buy now, pay later. And from what I understand, there has been 115% growth in just 1 year in BNPL financing, if you like. That is, again, more contractual. Would you like me to talk a little bit about it, or should I just move on? Okay. So basically what we are seeing with BNPL, particularly in Bangladesh, is you want to buy, say, for example, a computer. What happens is you get it now, but you are allowed to pay for it over a period of time with zero interest. So that's been taking off a lot. And on the onset of that, we're also seeing a lot of tech-enabled peer-to-peer lending. That is also leveraged with through a licensed bank or a financial institution, or even a microfinance institution. But I just wanted to mention something that my colleague Noreen Ahmed was reminding me today, which is that innovative funding doesn't have to be just through cash, right? It can be in kind as well. And something that you've already mentioned, you know, the voucher schemes that we are seeing being implemented, right? So that can be used for capacity building. You don't give the cash to the company or the organization seeking the fund. You give it to someone who helps them do capacity building. And that is also an innovative way of funding. However, with all of this that's going on, and I'm sure there are going to be other models that are innovative and come to the fore. But having said that, we shouldn't really write off equity and debt either, right? There is a reason they are the standard. And the reason is there are special laws which support equity and that support debt, which help you enforce a contract better, and which helps you dispose a litigation or a claim quicker than anything else. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anita. I think that's much more than what I expected. And just FYI, I didn't know what she's going to say, so I didn't know that you're going to mention not a lot of the SINC and RRMF transaction. That being said, I just wanted to highlight that revenue sharing agreement it comes up quite often when we talk about GLI. And so it might be a topic that worth deeper dive into, but obviously it also comes with certain risk that you might want to be aware of ahead. So you know who to speak to at the end of this session. And but before we wrap up, I also wanted to ask you, maybe also to all the panelists actually, it's about finalizing a deal, either be it for a woman-led enterprise or a business for women, right? What are some of the things that you would advise the entrepreneur to look out for when signing a deal with an investor?
I'm going to, Maxine, if you allow me, I'm going to address it both for the entrepreneur as well as the investor, because we see both sides, right? So for the entrepreneur, the first thing is please read what's being given to you, right? If not you, then, you know, in Bangladesh, we have 2 degrees of separation. For sure, there's a lawyer, you know, right? Just go to them, give them this document, know what you're signing off on, right? The other thing is for entrepreneurs, please have a growth projection or a funding plan ahead of you, right? Because more and more as the Bangladesh funding scenario becomes more matured, what we are finding is that, and Nijhar Bhai and Bijon are here, I'm sure they can add a lot of light on this as well, you know, the funders are also becoming very focused on, oh, whom did you raise from in the last round? Oh, well, they are more focused. So say, for example, if Tuvalu is funding someone, you know, and next, I don't know, if you go to someone else, they may say, oh, the Tuvalu trajectory and ours do not align. right? So these are, as we mature, it's very important to understand what your business is. You know, we had here a lot of conversation around, are you an SME or are you a startup? It is a very vital conversation because your growth trajectory and your funding, plan will differ on what type of an organization you are, and you need to know that. Also, you need to sit down with yourself, if you like, or your founders and decide, what am I looking to do? Do I want to IPO in 5 years' time, or am I happy with, getting my dividends, and are my investors happy with getting a dividend at the end of the day? So these are very important things for the entrepreneurs to first understand for themselves before they go out and seek any sort of funding. For the investors, Maxime, the first thing I want to say is, if you're funding someone, go to the ground, right? If you're funding someone in Borishal, don't just sit in Dhaka. Go to Borishal, see what's happening there. You have to go to the ground to see what you're being told is actually right. You know, due diligence has very many aspects to it. For us, we look at the legal, there's financial, but then there are a whole lot of other, due diligences. You need to see whether the documents, whether the numbers, all of those match, right? Whether the 5 farms that they're supposed to have are actually there, or the 100 vendors that they are saying they have are actually there, right? So go to ground. For investors, the other thing is obviously due diligence is very, very important. The other thing, the last thing that I do want to mention is investors also, again, it's wonderful to see the funding, scenario mature in Bangladesh. And, that's a lot to do with everyone who sponsored this event today. But what we are also seeing is, you say, for example, pre-seed investors asking for, or say angels asking for more than they should, so know which stage of the funding you're coming in at and what you can expect. Don't ask for too much, so that which would restrict the company from raising at the next round or the round after that. Sorry, there's a whole lot of information in there, which I'm sure was very boring. If you have any questions, my colleague Noreen is sitting right there. You can go talk to her after the event. Thank you.
Would you like to add some things to it?
Yes, Anita Appa is the expert here, so she has covered almost everything. But what I'd like to add is that this is for entrepreneurs, obviously. And as an investor, I'll take Anita Appa's advice always. As entrepreneurs, please know which stage you are in, as Anita Appa said, and what should be the funding instrument. Like if you are in seed stage, what should be your funding instrument? Also be aware of the runway. Don't wait till the last moment and approach investors and say that, oh, okay, I want to close this round within 1 month. You should you should appreciate the fact that investors need their own time for due diligence. Also, you should decide or, take legal advice that whether it should be a priced round or whether it should be safe or convertible note. So if you hurriedly do a priced round at the beginning, at the seed stage, and at Series A, then you say, okay, we are doing safe. So it doesn't really always work that way. So yes, please take legal advice from the beginning. Also understand the conditions precedents and conditions subsequent. So before you sign up for anything. Also at the pre-seed or seed stage, don't take on too many investors on board and dilute your stake that much, so that you will have difficulty having investors at the next stages, Series A, Series B. And you should always have an exit plan in mind. I know it's difficult at the beginning, but you should think of it at the beginning. So when you discuss with investors, you can communicate that to them, that whether it will be acquisition by another strategic investor, whether you have planned to go for IPO, so things like that. So thank you. That was all from me.
Thank you, Anita Appa. Thank you, Sarwat Appa. There was actually a lot of information that I did not know. So it was very enlightening for me. And as I hear about the funding scenario in Bangladesh, I'm actually very optimistic But at the same time, when I look at our members, I wonder if they're even being able to take advantage of this, or they have the capacity to do so. So I genuinely hope that as GLI actually matures, as the funding scenario matures, we also take steps to bring those people who are not maybe in the same capacity level as the other entrepreneurs, and ensure that we're not leaving them behind as this scenario matures. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that last remark. It really nicely wrap up also what Biniyog Briddhi stands for, which is leave no one behind. And women is only one of them, but also what we care for is also, for example, populations that are traditionally not being included in the economic development, including the rural areas. Women in the context of Bangladesh tend also to be left behind. That's also the reason why we organize event as such. With that, I think now we could open the floor for maybe 2 questions, if any. We have a very, yeah. All right, so maybe this is also not new, to be honest, because usually in our trainer program, we also have a very quiet crowd when we ask any questions. But I do assume that you probably have a lot of conversations or questions that you might feel more comfortable asking during the networking session. So with that, I guess we can move on to the next session. Yeah, there's a question. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay, so basically the whole atmosphere, the whole demographic of women is different. They do, they try to do businesses, but you know, there's so many barriers because I think, I'm not sure, but like as she said, Barishal and Sylhet and other parts of the whole culture is different. It's not like, just for example, you are assuming that some people are financially literate. They're not actually. Like, you know, they don't know all these stuff. So is there anything that, you know, these women can, like, you know, sometimes do you feel that barrier that, you know, the language barriers coming in, or like you see that, like, is there anything that you would advise before funding that women should do, like, you know, a mentorship or apprenticeship or anything before, like, that's catered to their own demographic, not just like.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I do agree with you wholeheartedly that it is not the same. And as we move away from the capital, it's a different world out there. So the way we approach this is that we approach it in 3 different levels. One is basic education, another is financial literacy, and now we have added digital literacy as well. There are many women who do not have access to mobile phones, who do not have access to the internet. So I'm actually working on a project with Meta right now, and they have been talking to me on how to boost F-commerce. And I think we were speaking, and I told one of their colleagues from Meta that, you know, there are many women who do not have access to the internet, and you're asking them to open a business online. That is a very different issue. I think this is something that government programs are trying to address. There are many ministry approved initiatives which are being implemented by chambers of commerce and others who are providing these trainings, capacity building trainings, to women who would actually come forward and do financial literacy. So what, for example, from our experience, we had a program called Empower 50,000, and we actually implemented it completely outside the capital. And this was basically teaching financial literacy to entrepreneurs who are not really educated. So I think creating more awareness, funding more skill and capacity building exercises is extremely important. I would also like to draw your attention to a government-based initiative called Tathoapa. I am honored to be on board of the initiative. It is basically, Tatho means information. So it provides information on the various legal benefits, for the lack of a better word, that a woman entrepreneur and entrepreneur can have. So all you have to do is go to their website, type it, and you would be able to get better information on it. But that is assuming that you have digital literacy. So there needs to be a lot of work on the grassroots level that in order to make them literate digitally and financially. Thank you.
In that case, I guess we can move on to the next session of the event today. Before we wrap up, we actually have some news that we would like to announce. So over to you, Fariha.
Thank you so much, first and foremost, our panelists, for that insightful discussion. I think with that, we're going to move into one of the final segments before the closing remarks. We'll actually have the contract signing of 2 of our IRMF candidates from the cohort 2022, and we're very pleased to have them in the room with us today. To give you a little bit of background and also the Impact Ready Matching Fund, it is a 1-to-1 matching fund that targets early stage impact startups or startups that has an impact potential. And the average ticket size is actually USD 100,000, and the goal is to incentivize them to establish and implement impact measurement and management practices. And some of the companies that have actually already received IRMF in our previous cohort includes HelloTask, Shuffle, iPage, and furthermore. With that, I think we're going to invite our first impact enterprise today, which is AgriShift. To give you just a little bit more background on AgriShift, AgriShift helps farmers sell their products to businesses and consumers by providing a tech-enabled supply chain, merging the physical and also the digital worlds for a digital business model, which takes care of the demand aggregation, sourcing, and delivery. With that, I'll also invite the AgriShift team to join us up front. With that, we will invite the second impact enterprise, which is WeGrow. WeGrow is a tech-based agri startup that is working towards revolutionizing the archaic agricultural industry by integrating the latest technology in all aspects of the agri supply chain. They bring major reforms in the agricultural industry of Bangladesh while ensuring that all the stakeholders, which includes farmers, agricultural facilitators, partner merchants, and definitely customers, are benefited. With that, can we please also have the WeGrow team up front with us? That wraps up the schedule for event today, and we're going to wrap it up with final closing remarks from Bijan Islam, CEO and co-founder at LightCastle Partners.
Thank you everyone for coming. I know it's a Thursday afternoon, not the easiest of time to come. There was traffic, weekend that all of us wants to go home, but we are really, really glad that all of you took time out of your schedule to be here today. I think the topic that we discussed has strong impetus for Bangladesh. I think Bangladesh as a country has often been cited that where the prime minister, the leader of the opposition, and the speaker of the parliament are all females. I think in terms of female empowerment, where the country is today, I think there's a lot long we need to do. I think that's why the topic was very interesting, and I'm very excited to be in a room with all such powerful female leaders in the room. So I'm excited. Thank you for coming. I think dinner would be served very, very shortly, but do take the time to network and see you next time. Thank you. Maria, back to you.
Yeah, I think with that, we can commence to the final segment for today. You don't need to be stuck to your seats anymore, so you're free to move around. With that, we begin the networking session, and dinner is going to be served shortly. So we hope that you're able to stay with us and eat tonight as well. Thank you so much, everybody.